Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're so honored and excited to be hosting this discussion with Sarah and Victoria to mark the launch of Sarah's collection, Fovea Ages Ago, published by Hadra Press. I'll say a few words to begin with, just to let everyone join the call. I'll start by briefly introducing Hadra, and then I'll say a few words about the format of this conversation, and then we'll head over to our speakers. So my name is Brevity, and this time last year, Farhana, who is also on this call, and I set up Hadra Press, which is a new independent and proudly political publishing house run by and for people of color. We felt that for too long, people had spoken about how white the publishing industry is, and while mainstream publishing had been gesturing towards diversity for a while, nothing really seemed to change. For too long, authors who aren't seen to be writing for a white middle-class general audience are told that their work is only suited for special markets. And while there might be occasional surges in demand for writing by people of color, it's impossible not to feel tokenized when our writing is only considered valuable according to fickle market forces or publishers' diversity quotas. So the problem is that it doesn't stop there. And even when writers are granted book deals, their work is forced into a certain mold that editors and sales departments think will appeal to this constructed idea of the mainstream audience. With Hadra, we wanted to try and build something completely new. We publish books by writers of color with original and transformative ways of seeing, imagining, and remaking our world. Our aim is to create a list of books that archive our stories, experiment with possibilities of changing our world, and build a generative and healing community for people of color in the process. We don't think that there is an either or between the beautiful and the revolutionary, and so we're incredibly excited by works that combine literary innovation with political engagement. So that's a little bit about Hadra. We feel so privileged to have been able to publish Sarah's first collection as our very first book. Sarah's collection takes primary school as its landscape, showing how these formative first experiences with their patterns and emotional contours can stay with us later in life. We love the energy in her poetry. It's full of sharp movement and acute insight, as well as how the work is full of reverence for childhood, for friends, for the world around us, for artistic predecessors. We're so thankful to Sarah and Victoria for joining us today. Sarah is a poet and writer from London. She is an alumna of the Barbican Young Poets and a member of Octavia Poetry Collective for Women of Color. And Victoria is a poet, writer, and artist. Her work has appeared in publications including the Poetry Review, the London Review of Books, and Chicago Review. Victoria is the director of Mother Tongues, an intergenerational poetry, film, and translation project centering the Indigenous language heritages of Black poets. Thank you again, Victoria and Sarah. We're really glad to have you here. A few notes on the structure of this event. So we'll start with a reading from Sarah and then listen to Victoria and Sarah chat about the collection. In the meantime, you're all very welcome to type your questions for Victoria and Sarah in the Zoom chat. Farhana and I will be collecting these questions, and then in the last 15 minutes of the discussion, Farhana will present these questions to our speakers. This is obviously a safe space and a forum for respectful discussion, so please do bear that in mind when typing your comments. If your video gets choppy, it might help to turn off your camera. And this discussion is being recorded and will be available on YouTube afterwards. Thank you all again for joining. Thank you so much to Sarah and Victoria. We'll now head over to Sarah to read one of our poems. Okay, 1 second. I think we're having 1 minute.
Thank you so much. Okay. All that talk about like people of color voices and then I was on mute. Whoa. Obviously, I'm joking. I love you guys so much. Thank you so much, Farhana and Bracknell. That was such a nice introduction. And thank you, Victoria, for joining me for this launch and being in conversation with me. I'm so gassed, as you can tell, about this, a whole collection of poems. And I'm gonna read a few now before we get into the conversation. So I'm gonna start with one that's like really early on, called A Pin Through the Folded Page. So, I break the water's seal, teeth first this time, and wade to shore, where the sinewy girl in the green summer dress waits, playing a game I don't remember teaching her, compassing, touching the tops of sorrow's many heads, duck, duck. I'm a welcome interruption. Holding off the chase is the game, I realize. She tells me I'm a swallow, and I keep slamming into her bedroom window. I tell her to stop sitting opposite me on the train. I can't write when she does that. She asks, do you think we'll be able to feel it when the spinning stops? A sitting duck now, combing the sand. I say, I think the skin on our backs will kiss the skin on our fronts. And her fingers slack, and she rolls her eyes, and she tells me again to stop treating her like a child. The next one I'm going to read is literally the next one because I feel like it, which is School Poem, In the Photo Above My Peg. I wonder at the girl in the photo above my peg so much that at playtime, Miss follows me into the cloakroom. I know the girl in the photo. I see her all the time, and all the time she's doing something different. Miss asks what she's doing now, and I keep my mouth closed because I don't yet know how to say. She runs, screaming, like her name out of your mouth. Operatic, as in needful, like her name out of your mouth. The girl runs from you like her name out of your mouth, miss. You speak her like a blade, cut from lead, so she runs, unspooling across the frame and from no place, back again. Outline hanging from her, an unhemmed dress. She leaps, billowing, frame to frame, billowing. She leaps. She runs so fast. You look back, and you look back. You look back, so fast. She runs, miss. I'm gonna read one more, and it's gonna be Sunflower, Safflower. We're in the greenhouse at the far end of the field, heaving from the sprint, sticking to ourselves, pointing to the same plot. Look, sunflower, you say. Look, safflower, I say. Rows of yellow that couldn't be believed to bleed the way they eventually do. Some things are so unsightly, they become sad. Things like children leaving the faith they were raised with, or puddles in the heat. I want to cut your eyelashes so they grow in thistled like mine, and we both have to pare things away to see. See how the truth starts as a seed or a stone, how you can't make one the other. I want to rub this truth against the roof of your mouth. Once it's under the tongue, once it's against the gums, there is no going back, I'm afraid. You're the first person I spoil in this way. Thank you guys so much. Thank you so much.
Oh, my goodness. It is just such an honor to be here with you and to be welcoming this book into the world. And I feel like I've seen this coming for such a long time. We had a little catch up yesterday, and one of the things that was on my mind was about the fact that even as early as, this must have been like 2014, 15, 16. And I remember you telling me about this word, about this part of the eye called the fovea. And I remember thinking, wow, that's really cool. And you've carried it into this book as a kind of like organizing principle for how we absorb the world and how we perceive it and how it shapes us. And so it's just so amazing to just be holding this, and it's such a beautifully produced piece of work, from the poetry to the illustrations to the jacket. It's amazing. So why don't we start at the beginning? Why don't we start with the title of this wonderful chapbook? Tell me about the Fovea centralis. Tell me about what's driving this book and how you made your start with putting it together.
I think that, so I, as everybody who knows me knows, like on every social media handle, Fovea is like in the name, and has been for like probably since around that time, like 2014, 15, when I started becoming obsessed with it. And I think it was first introduced, I say this in the author's note, but to me in like an anatomy lecture, you know, during undergrad, where I didn't understand anything was going on, but I really liked the sound of how the words, just how the words sounded. So in and amongst all of these like very old Latin pieces of terminology for the body, like the Fovea centralis or Fovea centralis was just such a like interesting sound, and I like just kept like saying it and like mouthing it. And then when you get to about the meaning and how it's like the central most part of the retina that like controls detailed vision and has the most condensed kind of like area or concentration of cones, I think it is. So like the sensory receptors that can sense light in and amongst this kind of like broader organ, this broader tissue that is the retina, that I thought was like that's its whole thing's job. But yeah, I just was like really captivated by the idea of it, and I think I imbued it with a lot of meaning, because it does. It has a lot of meaning, but I think saying it over and over again and just being the way that I am, which is somebody who hyperfixates on things very, very, not easily, but seriously when I do, I would just like say it to people in conversation or explain it when people didn't really ask me to explain it. And I think what it means to me is that like the idea of being a receptor and a receptacle, something that is capacious enough to hold like the world and like be responsible for just like our vision, our entry into the world and its entry into us. And then as well as that kind of like acuity aspect, like just the holding part too, like being able to just hold so much in a really small, like tiny area in the back of your eye. I think that's just what got me hooked. And I swiftly decided it was going to become part of my identity in a really deep way. And I think that's just how it came about. And now I think the meaning has changed me over the years, because even when Farhana could attest to this, she was like, what does it mean to you? And I was like, I feel like I've explained it to people so many times that I don't know if I've like rinsed it of its meaning, but I definitely hadn't, because just going back into it and like thinking about it made me realize, like, as a kid you just develop things that are like your thing, and that was my thing, and it was a really nice one. I'm like well done past me for latching onto this idea, or this like concept, and just like not letting go. And the ages ago part of the title also was something that was just on my mind, because I knew a lot of the poems would relate to the past, and specifically childhood and primary school, and I wanted to like have something that like was indicative of that. And yeah, the slash I think was again Farhana's idea, so, or Rector's idea. It came like as a collaborative effort to think about how to illustrate this kind of like, I mean, it's not a fracture, it's kind of like some kind of like relation between the two terms. Like there's a portal between now and then, and how do you like illustrate that best in a title, and that kind of like here and there nature of it. And that's how it came out. That was a very long-winded answer. I'll try and keep it more concise now, because I realize this is a discussion, it's not like a Q&A.
No, it's your book, and like this is such a good chance for us to really like we were saying yesterday, you know, it's one thing like having a book out and then like some random person like reviews it and then says, oh, this is what I think, but like you're here, and that's such a treasure for us as we hold this book in our hands. Yesterday I was reading the opening poem of this book to myself, and it's the one on page 11 titled "Poetry Has Broken the Back." And I'll just like quote a little bit to give a sense of it to anyone who's not got this yet, in which case they should get it. But you open by saying, "Poetry has broken the back of my voice, craft a bowl from spine like lifted hands, waiting for something to fall into them. Poetry is taping postcards to hotel rooms. I'm dizzy, I'm watching a film in a language I don't understand, and I'm watching my hands write subtitles. I'm falling asleep on my phone. I'm speaking into my hands. I'm sweetening my tea with baby tea." It's so dreamlike, and so for me, because my sort of relationship with this poem, it kind of captures that real trickiness of the act of actually writing a poem, and how difficult that can be.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask how it felt for you, or how poetry feels for you as something that you love, but also, you know, have a living relationship with, that I think is so well encapsulated in this poem. So yeah, what do you feel about that?
Man, poetry is everything, man. I think I always feel corny saying it. I feel like I'm never gonna not stop feeling corny saying it. But I think for me, I was saying this to you again yesterday, but with poetry, like I feel like I'm my best self when I'm my like poet self, when I'm writing poetry, or when I'm reading poetry, or when I'm thinking, or like talking to someone impassionedly at a house party about a specific poem, or a line in a poem that something reminded me of. That's like me at my best. I feel like kinder and like better and like good. And so this poem, like the first line, like "Poetry has broken the back," like is a collaboration between me and my dad, because with that line, like I hadn't ever used the term really, like, you know, like when you break the back of something, like you really like get on the other side of it, you like get a hold on it or a grasp of it. And he told me that, he gave me that piece of advice when I was writing an essay I didn't want to write in uni, and he was like, you know, you just have to break the back of it, and then, you know, you'll be fine, you'll get there. And I was like, wow, okay, poet, go off. And I like noted it down in my phone notes app, and just thought about like poetry as that for my voice. Like that's like what it does for me. Like I'm just kind of like, if I can get a grip on it, and that might not be the only grip or the only grasp or the only point of entry to something, but it is one particular one, and that kind of hold is something poetry can only really offer me, or only is the only thing that has offered me that for like really complex ideas, or like moments where I'm feeling kind of like sensorily overloaded, or like kind of confused or dissociative, and I like don't really know how to like make sense of things. I think like I think, you know, there's not one definition of poetry, but just calling something poetry and naming it like almost gives you that like allowance to like play and just go, okay, make sense of it in any way you want to make sense of it, and it will be right because it's a poem. That's like, yeah, I think that's what I was thinking of in that poem, particularly like when you're spatially somewhere else, but you're thinking of a holiday you might maybe have had, or somewhere else is sending you posts. You know what I mean? Like that's what that's where I was going.
It's amazing because I think, like, I really agree with what you're saying about how poetry kind of grants you, or like being able to call something a poem grants you that kind of like permission to let it be its complicated, tangled, sort of unsure, emotional, mixed with passive or less emotional. It kind of allows for the messiness of life, I feel, in a way that is quite honest and doesn't feel restricted to having to be linear or practical or sort of literal. Yeah, I really do feel that, definitely.
That's it for me, definitely. And I think that's like the most fun that I've ever had as well. Like, I think there's a serious part of it, which is, you know, craft and like what you the poetics that you want to develop in that as well, like personally. But there's also just like it being fun and like really jokes, and also you can like, there are some poems where I'm like, this is a joke, no one will know it's a joke, but I know it's a joke, and it'll make me like smile every time. I think that's something that's really precious to me about it too.
Yeah, amazing. So what was it like putting this together? Because I remember like, I feel like, and this is a mad thing, because I think as poets we often write so quietly, like we kind of like write in our little corners, and then like we go to a reading and we read something, or we kind of share it at like a workshop. And you know, I remember meeting you at BYP, and like you were so cool, and I was like, I'll be her friend. But it's like, you know, we build up our work over like long periods of time, but I don't think many of us think about our work as a collection. A lot of us kind of are in a space and we write poems from that space, but like we're not writing a book when we write our poems. So I wanted to ask you, what was it like putting these together? Because I remember like when you showed me a few of these, and I was like, oh my goodness, I'm so excited she's having a book out. But it feels like that was so not, like, honestly, 2020 was a madness, but like it feels like so not long ago that you were putting these together. And you're like, there's a book now? It's amazing. What? So yeah, how was it doing that? What was that process like of actually thinking in terms of a book?
Yeah, it was so foreign, like it was so new to me. Obviously I've never put together any kind of pamphlet or chapbook before, so I was like, I thought about what all of my poems seemed to be like oriented towards, or a lot of them anyway, and like fragments of writing that I've had, and like unfinished things that I call unfinished for ages, that were just like sitting with me in my like Google Docs, and realized like a lot of it was preoccupied with a specific period of time, or at least like reflecting on a specific period of time, and memory is like an idea as well. And so I think that was like the first thing, is like I know that I want to make this chapbook very, and I said this word to you yesterday, I said insular, but I don't know if that's the right word. I wanted it to be its own, I wanted it to be contained in its own way, because I just wanted to, I think, just give myself permission to like really detail the nitty-gritty and feel okay with compiling and collating poems that are concerned with like very quiet things. And yeah, and then putting them together was really interesting, because I knew that there were like ones I was like, this is definitely gonna go, and I'm so happy with this poem. I'm like, yeah. But then I think there were also others where in the process of assembly, I had another Word doc called Debrief, which was just like all of the like fragments of things or poems that I was like, I don't know if this is gonna make it in, but I'll leave it here, because it will kind of be the outer shell of the book. Like there's like other poems that didn't make it in, but they're like floating around. And that was really interesting, like going back and forth, and sometimes knowing that I mean, ages ago, way back in BYP, Jacob Samler gave me a piece of advice that was like, feedback on a poem, where he was like, you keep keeping things from the poem. Like, you keep just like, you're not giving the poem everything, you're keeping things. And I was like, wow, read me. Because it was very interesting to know that even though I was projecting or like trying to imbue poems with like a certain vulnerability and like particularity, you can still sense when something's being withheld. And that's not always a bad thing either. I think that can sometimes contribute to you reading the poem and knowing like, this isn't everything, or not everything's here. But then, yeah, just in the assembly part, I think I had that question in my mind a lot, because I was like, I don't want to keep anything from the poems that doesn't need to be kept with me. I wanted to like make sure if there was something that I'd cut out, or if there was something that I was toying with not putting in, it was for a reason other than my own like fear or like my own like anxiety. And so like that kind of back and forth process also reminded me of like readings, because I missed reading so much last year. And I'm someone who's a poem is how it sounds. Like, that first and foremost to me is like, it's the reading that's the thing for me. And as a poet of color, you're kind of, well, I was like put off claiming that for a while, because you could feel how sometimes you'd be pigeonholed into a certain type of sound or a certain type of like spoken poetry. But I realize now that like that is the most important thing to me. And so reading them again and again and going back and forth across drafts and like knowing how I wanted to recite them was really important as well. And that dictated to also the like assembly process too. But yeah, I guess that's, yeah.
I hear what you're saying about, like, I know that you said it wasn't the right word, but when you said that you wanted this book to kind of have like an insular or insularity to it, you know, like I think it's something really powerful when you say just enough and not too much. And I think that's something that you're so good at, because, you know, you've taken inspiration from this part of the eye that kind of like cups our perception of the world, but you also are not, you're so selective. So there are some really small poems in here, especially sort of like towards the middle of the book. And this one that I really love, I mean, let's even talk about school poem on page 27, school poem within brackets, fed. And it's so short, but there's something that is, there's more to it than the words on the page, but you're letting the reader think a little bit and hold it, you know, like I've said this now you think about it and you unpack it, where you're saying things like, you know, and the spoon was in my mouth when I woke and I didn't ask why, and maybe I should have, but instead I swallowed it, and the cool metal slid down my throat, and the silver was at once within me like it was never its own, and I found that I could be fed by a tool for feeding, and I never hungered again. There's a lot in here, there's a lot of feeling, and there's a lot of looking back and reminiscing, and there's a lot of almost biblical, like this happened and then that happened and that begat that and that begat that. And I'm just thinking, you know, how do you kind of ring a moment or ring a memory or a feeling of such richness in such small space? What's your relationship to brevity and think about what you are.
That's an excellent question. I think brevity is the best. I think it's so useful because that's exactly like what I love about poems, when they're short, but you know that the poet has like put in the poem what needs to be there, and it's up to you to assemble or disassemble or like, you know, move things around in the way that, and that's part of the process of the poem too. Like, it's part of the experience. It's not just like the listening, it's like the going back and being like, does this connect to that, or is this a completely different image, or you know, whatever it is. And that, like, for this poem, I and for a lot of short poems actually, like I'll know that there are like 2 lines that definitely need to be in there, or 3 lines I'm like, this is definitely needs to be there. And I'll just like sit with it for a long while. Like these are old. These are yeah, like I'll sit with it for a long while, and I'll like I remember trying to like piece it into longer form poems, or see where maybe it could fit with something else. But yeah, I just knew that they would need to be contained in this way. And also, inside note for everybody who's here, the school poems used to be one thing, like one poem. But I think I realized that they need, like, yes, same title with a little delineation, but like I like the feeling of the going through a collection as well, or through pages, and knowing that there's something that's being called back to that isn't exactly this, but like there's a reason for that connection to be there. And that just like changing your experience of all of those individual poems, but then also just the process of reading as well. I think that was like what most interested me, because I also love sequences, and I love when people in collections will have like names or titles for things continually repeated, or even just words throughout different poems repeated. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're related in any deep or meaningful, or any deep or like, you know, immediate way. But it is meaningful, and it is like a thread that just like runs through them. Yeah, I love a short poem. I love that you asked me that question, because I love a short poem.
Another thing that I want to really sort of like get into the sort of fabric of about this book is that I feel that it's such a welcome addition to the poetry landscape, because I feel that the experience of being young as in primary school, young and black, and then young and black and female is really interesting when you think about how gender then becomes, how gender applies to you or is applied to you by the outside world and the circumstances that you find yourself in. So to put it more concretely, I think that young black girlhood is there, it's inherently queered anyway, because you want the picture of, say, femininity, even at that age when none of this stuff should be foisted upon anyone. Even at that age, you don't fit the mold of traditional girlhood.
Yeah.
You're something closer to, you know, I feel like there's something in it about ultimately already being more boyish because you're racialized as black. And then there's something in it from sometimes in black communities having an additional pressure to be proper, to be, you know, girlish, or to be sort of presentable. Yeah. And so you end up in this really weird sort of gray area where if you're awake to it, and if you kind of are aware of it and you bring it through into your later life, I think it does make for an experience of queerness that it kind of primes you for, in my opinion, I feel that you end up being primed for queerness, and you end up being very, very awake to the way that gender and race intersect, depending on where you are. And this is more of a meditation, but I'm just very fascinated by that, and I wanted to pose that to you because I do feel that in so many of your poems here, you do kind of get at the tension between the self and the outer world, and how it makes demands of you depending on where you are, and how you navigate that. And it sometimes means being a bit more chameleon-like than I think other people might be used to. So yeah, I guess my question is about, you know, what role does queerness play in this collection, and how it intersects with your memories of being young and, you know, at primary school. I remember specifically remember thinking, like, as a kid, like, oh, like, I don't get anything from being a girl. Like it doesn't work. I can't be me. And there was so many, it's not fair. Like, so yeah, anyway.
That's yeah. There's a lot there, and I agree with you. I think that like the being awake to it is a real thing. Like knowing from a really young age like what gender is, even though you don't have any of the language, you know what gender is because you know what it affords and what it disallows, and that is a real like is made very clear to you, and because it dictates how you move in lots of different spaces with your friends who are white, with your friends who are black, with your friends who are white girls, with your friends who are white. You just you know how you're supposed to, or how you might move in order to like navigate, play with gender, play with the expectations of you in the space, and teachers as well a lot of the time too. Like, so because you have that awareness, and I think because you become awake to it, either you become awake to it and you like play with it in a way lots of people do, or I think you can become very fixated on, you know, the aspiring to girlhood and like womanhood and all of the categorical kind of like markers of that, that are always, you know, in opposition to who you are by nature of the category aspect of it. Yeah, so I think I really relate to that. I really relate to like the queer aspect of it as well, because you just you know that it's all, you know that gender's not real, because you're like, even if you like, you're like, okay, boys and girls, and you change over there and you change over here or whatever, every other social encounter, every other social interaction, big or small, you're very aware that like this is all like fake, because the way you're treating this person because they're girls, not the way you're treating me. So, you know. Yeah, so I think that's really, for me, I found like very interesting, because I did adopt that kind of chameleon aspect, and like I felt, thinking back, I think I felt very compelled to like make sure I knew what my own standards for myself were. So like, even if it's not femininity in that like very traditional sense, it's gonna be like being a tomboy, like it's gonna be being good at everything. It's gonna be being, it's gonna be like, you know what I mean, like it's gonna be like performing in other ways, so that I have my own markers to like meet, and like and like identities to kind of aspire to. And that also has its drawbacks, because you invest so much in that sometimes it just like clouds you. And for me, did I think make me feel very like reliant on those things in order to feel like somebody. Like I was like, I had to do all of these things and meet these markers in order to feel like, okay, Miss Owen's going to pay attention to me because XYZ, and I did this, and I like blah blah blah. Whereas she should just pay attention to me because I'm a person in the space, you know. Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think like when you're a kid as well, like because so much of your experience is shaped by desire, like who you fancy, who you have a crush on, but you don't necessarily like name it as desire just yet, or nobody names it like that for you. You just kind of like create your own rules and create your own like yeah, I guess like rules and like safeties, and like you know how to respond to specific kinds of crushes and how to respond to like other kinds, and you know that a lot of the time you're not going to be read in a specific way as like desirable. So what does that mean for you when you find something desirable? It also makes you aware, sorry, I'm just going off on one. It makes you aware of like how other people are denied desirability in a very similar way. And I think that then becomes formative for like your later relationships, because for me, all of my friends now have been denied desirability in a very particular way, either in a similar way that I was, or like in a unique way to them. And so like that becomes like a very, you don't talk about it obviously, but you just know like none of us like had boyfriends in year 4 or 5 because one, yeah, and then two, like because we're not even included in that conversation for whatever reason. But it makes you very imaginative though. I think it makes you maybe hyperfixate in the ways that I do, or like maybe project a lot onto like your own objects of desire, because you know like, okay, it's not, I'm not gonna find it here. But like who did I have a crush on? I mean, I had a crush on this boy called Liam that I was obsessed with, and mainly because he was just like new and entirely different to everybody else, in that like there was like no inhibitions, no like I shouldn't smile here, or I should behave like this around this person, like just so barefaced and like green. And I was like, that is also now, has shaped me in a way, because it's something that I find like really attractive in friends, in anybody, just somebody who's so open and like not like concerned with like how their responses to you are going to be, or like how they move in a space. I think that's like, that was very formative for me. That was very formative for me.
So much to unpack, and I'm just going to check the time. Okay, I want to ask you about, oh, there's so much. I feel that there's just so much music in this work, and you've already touched on language and the sound of words, and you know, the ways that you are sensitive to those and you pay attention to that, and also how often as like poets of color, like if you say you're a poet, like the assumption is that you are like a spoken word poet, and that's without any sort of shade being thrown on spoken word, but it's just, that's usually the assumption that's made. But then again, why not pay attention to the sound of the words you're reading? I mean, you wrote them. In addition to that, though, there is so much music in here, not just in terms of like the sound of words, but like, I'm so fascinated to hear from you about the artists, and they don't have to be musicians especially, but you know, like the artists or filmmakers or authors or literal, you know, songwriters who have informed your writing practice. So yeah, I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about how what you listen to feeds this work, because obviously at the beginning there is a playlist, which I just, so yeah.
Shouts out to Hajar for that idea, because it's a really great idea. And like, you're right, like music means so much to me and has shaped my writing in a really important way. And I think in the poems it comes up as direct calls to specific songs or specific artists, but then also like the kind of musicality that I like see in poets that I really like people who just have their own rhythm to them, or like when I've seen them read, they're like electric. They're like, so I'm like physically moving, like going with the rhythm that they're going with, and just like having a great time. I have a really distinct memory of seeing Jay Bernard read at like the T.S. Eliot Prize, like maybe like 1 year ago, and they read from their recent collection Surge, and that collection has such like, just, I mean, it's harrowing. Like it's about like the New Cross fire, and it's calling back to really painful experiences and memories, but like it also doesn't abandon that kind of like inherent rhythm and musicality, and like, because it's part of like the lives of those people, and it's part of like the life of the collection as well. And I remember hearing them read, and I was just like, I only want to write poems that will do this to other people, like will have you be like or like, you know, maybe not in the same way at all, but just like have a bodily response to it. And yeah, so I think that was really important to me. I think the songs, specific people, I'm just like joking that like I only wrote I'm joking that I only wrote like playlist poem because I want to meet all of those artists and be like, so there's a poem that I've written that has you in it, which isn't entirely untrue, but also it's not the reason. The poem has its own life and its own like, you know, narrative that's going on and like meaning to it. But like, I have been obsessed with Paolo Nutini for the longest time. I've been obsessed. Where is he?
Paolo.
No, I've been like, I've ever since the last album, I was like, when's the next one? Do you know what I mean? I was waiting. And I feel like I'll just search, I'll do a Twitter search for Paolo Nutini, and it'll be like, where's Paolo Nutini? And I'll be like, I've been saying. And I'm happy for him. He's probably living his life, but deep down, I'm like, I want him to someone to show him this poem, and he'll be, okay, let me drop the album now. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, No, I just completely relate. Like number one, where is he? But number two, like sometimes you do. Listen, no shame about it. Like I definitely will like be shouting out singers in acknowledgement in the hope that maybe
100%.
one day I'll be like, hey, it's me.
Yeah, I'll be like, I did that. Because their work means so much to you. You just know, like, I remember being a kid and going to see Paolo Nutini with my mom and just having a great time. And he's such a good storyteller and he's got a great voice, and I'm just like, chef's kiss. Also, I should point out, like, the Mitski, huge influence on me as a teen baby, like as a songwriter, as a lyricist. Monica Martin, who's also in that. I'm just like listing all of the artists in that, but I'll stop with Monica Martin. Like, she has a voice that's kind of like so captivating and like so transporting. And I think that she is somebody who we have the privilege of knowing artists in a new way, and like following them on like Instagram and stuff. And I know, like, she's also jokes and she's also goofy and she's also, like, got a great set of politics and is also just a bit weird, but in a great way. And to know that it's possible to like have a voice that like will feel like glass is breaking inside of your brain, you know, like is possible, and you could still be jokes and like cool and like and like fun in that way. I think, yeah, I sort of, my preoccupation with singers is a selfish one, but also a genuine like appreciation of just what voices can do, and like knowing that a good voice, a good speaking voice, a good performing voice either, like is a really, it's something that's really like captivating for me. So that's why I think it comes up in the poem so much, because I'm thinking about it and mapping experiences onto songs. Like in the poem Barflies, like I put in a song that is like Sarah Vaughan's Lullaby of Birdland, which is like beautiful song, and I think was it matches the energy of the poem in a way that I feel lucky to have listened to around the time where I was like working on / editing that poem and being like, no, this is going to go in because this is the sound of this. Do you know what I mean? This is a perfect, if you know, you know, but if you don't know, it's also fine. You can kind of guess, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Oh, thank you. I also wanted to ask you, and you've touched on this in terms of like thinking about voice, but you know, I know that you're someone who does so many things. So I know that you've done things relating to theatre. I know that you have obviously studied medicine. I know that you are currently studying global health, if I've got it right. And
yes.
you're very tuned into what's going on in the world, and you're very, you know, you're really in a lot of circles that are very focused on activism. So I really wanted to ask you how those different things feed into your poetry, or are they kind of like, what's the relationship between all of the other things that you do and your poetry? Does it feel like one massive canvas, or does it feel that poetry is a kind of haven? Yeah, what's your relationship?
I think I'm working towards it being this massive canvas, but at the moment it is like more over here, kind of separate from the rest of things. But I think obviously having important political commitments like is a big part of my life, and like making sure that they're as represented and like dedicate as much time to them as I do with all the things that I care about, you know, is really important to me. But I think I definitely wouldn't have this chapbook out if it wasn't for the people that I've met through those movements. Like I think so much of what I've recognized in poetry for me, and like through poetry for me, is that it's the collective is everything. Like the community you're part of is everything, and it doesn't have to be a poetry community, but it can be just like the people who are your people, who will check you in really important ways and challenge you in really important ways, and also gas you, and you feel like you feel terrible, and you need it. I think that like knowing that those important relationships and those important friendships are possible, and they can also be grounded in this kind of like shared radical imagination that we are all hoping moving towards and ushering in this like very different world that we want to all live in for each other as well. I think that just gives me like a headspace to be like, okay, a poem might not do anything, and this is a separate question, but a poem might not, you know, do anything material, but like it's still important to write, it's still important to do the things you care about, it's still important to make your art, because in that transformed what are we working towards that for, if not to be able to do our art, you know? And the art that we will make in that world will be incredible, and I can't wait to get there. But it's just, yeah, I think that's the most important contribution that like all of my friends who've like shaped me politically and like given me such a grounding in all of the things that I now am so dedicated to, like, is that recognition that every part of you is important and everything that you care about is important, and it's not to sacrifice one thing to do the other. It's like all of it can be part of this one canvas, is a great way to put it when you said canvas, like, and that's what I'm working towards, to think less of it as like, I do poetry in my spare time and then I do this over here. It's like, no, I'm a poet, and I also like I want abolitionist public health now. Like I want, you know, full abolition in our lifetimes. But and none of that is contradictory. All of it is on a level, you know.
Absolutely. You're reminding me of something that Fred Moten said. I don't know where he said this because I saw it tweeted, but something about, you know, like I do want to see the end of the world so that I can see the next one. Do you know what I mean? And I think there is something so. I mean, I'm also wary of putting poetry on a pedestal as if poets can't also be problematic, but there is something, when it's done well, there is something that's quite world-making about poetry, because it's just such a great medium for holding empty space, but also holding the fullness through you know, specificities and
absolutely.
So I think poetry is so expansive in ways that are quite deceptive.
Yeah. That reminds me of June Jordan's poem, like I think it's called like Letter to the Local Police Department, which is an incredible poem. And you know, June Jordan OG, got a chapbook because we love her in this house. But that poem is so like, it's so interesting because it's her, you know, there's a speaker in the poem who's writing a letter to the local police department about how they're speaker, and you recognize that they're like praising the local police department's work. And then it turns a bit, and the speaker starts asking the local police department, you know, why there's this unruly bed of roses that just has been, you know, loitering on the edge of its street for so long, and like, you know, cross-pollination is happening and they're not really happy about it. And she uses this incredible metaphor to like, you know, be like, racists are bad, and I'm so reductive, but like the ways in which, I hated the ways in which, you guys, but the ways in which like you can use a metaphor that is so beyond, like even in the poem you don't know where she's going with it until you get to the point and you're like, oh, I see, you're cussing out these people in a way that is so smart, and it requires them to engage with your craft in order to get how they're being cussed. Like it's so satisfying, do you know what I mean? And that's only possible in poetry. There's a direct way that people have, and she does say, you know, like the police are a violent institution and are a deeply racist institution, but she doesn't need to say it here because the purpose of this poem is a separate one. It's like it's going to take you on the journey and have maybe an even more lasting effect. Like I really recommend you guys. I'll maybe, if I can find it, I'll drop it in the chat or tweet about it later. But excellent poem.
Amazing. I'm just checking in with time. Great, I think we've got like 2 more minutes. So I know this is going to be like choosing one of your children as a favorite, but like, do you have a poem in this collection that kind of like is like you wrote it and you were like, yeah, like I'm sick. You know what I mean? Like, because it happens like when you write a poem you're like, whoa, I wrote that.
I really went off, but I really did that.
Like a poem that has kind of like unfolded itself more for you as time's gone on, or what poems really for you kind of summarize what you were trying to do with this book?
I think that there's, as soon as you said that, I like knew. I was like, yeah. One is birthday, and then one is nocturne, which is the final one in the end of the book. And birthday is for me. Like, birthday is a poem that I wrote that I really struggled with for a while, because I was like, I don't know how to say what I mean to say until I kind of got it, and the form kind of like broke for me, and I was like, okay, I love this. I'll just read it quickly.
Yes.
So birthday. 1 year, instead of cutting the cake, face screwed into a pucker, chewed into sugary nothing. Instead of looping the silk bow, amber, between my back and its brace, I become the cake, with a knife inside, delicious and inscrutable, like groundwater belting beneath the soil, confounding the dowser, with a knife inside. Like, even as reading it, I'm like, I went off. Like, I'm really like, I love this poem for me because it means so much to me to have like a poem that's about becoming more solid or becoming more dangerous, like in a way that's like, I've never felt like super confident enough to claim, but like just being able to do that and have a poem in there that announces that in a way was like very important to me. And yeah, I remember just working on it, and I remember like I remember getting to the final line and being like, with a knife inside, you know what I mean? Like really having the call to a specific image that I was like, I don't need anything else other than you to know that there's something here and there's a presence that I'm telling you is there. You can't know for sure is there, but I can draw on. And yeah, I really love that poem, man. I'm really glad you asked.
I love it too, and I feel like it kind of it's such a nice note to kind of to end on, in the sense of, again, it's a short poem, and I like, for my own work right now, I'm thinking so much about what it means to have interiority, to have your own inner life. And I think that you are one of my favorite poets for that reason. In the way that you write, there's something for you there. We live in an age where I think it's very easy to fall into selling something, and to fall into advertising, and to fall into sort of telling everybody before you've even told yourself. But I really do recognize in your work an attention to what feels good to you. What is your internal world? Like, what's your organizing principle for yourself? And how do you preserve that and also exist in the world? So I'm so grateful for your work, and I'm just so excited because I know that poetry isn't the only thing you're going to do. Like, I just like, it might be the first thing that you're coming out with, but it's just gonna, do you know what I mean? Just, guys, watch this one. But it's just incredible, and I'm just so excited for you, because I think your work is fantastic and has integrity, and is just, it has an aliveness, it has a knife inside, do you know what I mean? And you've got to have a knife inside these days.
You've got to have a knife inside. I'll cry right now. I will cry right now. It just means so much for you to say that, because I mean, I don't know if everybody here knows, but like, Victoria is a very, very formative poet for me. Meeting BYP and hearing how incredible her work was, and just knowing that like, I knew like you have that kind of like singularity and particularity in your poetry and in your voice, and that was like so good for me to see early on, and I was so drawn to you. And I know you're like, oh, she was so cool, but I was like, I knew her in the room at every point during BYP, because I was like, I need to know where Victoria is, because I need to like force a conversation. But yeah, it's such a joy and such a privilege to have you just support and be so loving and generous and giving in all the ways that you are. So thank you so much. And I know that the time is going. So I think the plan is for me to read one more poem and then we'll go into questions, maybe.
Yeah.
And the poem that I'm gonna read, corny, but you guys are gonna get it. I'm gonna read after the reading because I've missed reading so much. I miss everything about it. I just miss everything about it. I miss the people you bump into. I miss like the free glass of wine. I miss the wine that you steal after your one free glass of wine. I miss like knowing that you're going to go up to somebody and like thinking about what you're going to say because you want to sound like you care about their work because you do care about all this stuff. I miss it so much. And just congregating with your people at the end of a day or at the end of a week when you've all been like in different parts of London for me, and just like that feeling is so deeply satisfying. So I'm going to read it. And it starts with a few lines from Poem for My Love by June Jordan. So after the reading, after Poem for My Love by June Jordan. How do we come to be here next to each other in the night? Where are the stars that show us to our love inevitable? After the reading or the debrief or the in-conversation, when it is summer and by some juicy miracle, we are all still unbruised, dangling from our branches, near bursting our own flesh, we bottleneck the doorway and baptize the street, abandon the day's serious feeling after the reading or the debrief or the in-conversation, because despite being born into the slick arms of alienation, we are all still unbruised, dangling from our branches without memory of a time when outside was safe. Put simply, when you realize you are only a lapse of time long enough to be given a name, there is no use in thinking of capacity or tomorrow. After the reading or the debrief or the in-conversation, one house red forgets you your watch. You mumble something like, isn't it wild how babies hiccup in the womb? Isn't that sad? We are all still unbruised, still dangling from our branches, black and plural under a coral sky. We circle back to the topic of us, wanting everything after the reading or the debrief or the in-conversation. Thank you so much, guys. Just the joy. Just look at you, just swing, just so happy, just beaming.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Victoria. I kind of have chills. You know, you were talking earlier about people with good voices. Well, Sarah, you definitely have a good voice, a very good reading voice. So I'm opening the floor up to audience questions. So I want to start with one from Maimuna, which says, wanted to ask how Sarah's process has been in terms of finding confidence as a poet. Could she say a little about how she got started on this journey to being published?
Yeah, definitely. I was a baby poet in like the end of school. So like in sixth form, I would start writing poetry through journaling. And journaling is like a big part of it for me, just like knowing that things that I thought about during the day could become like something creative maybe. And so like that's the first kind of attempt. And then I saw the emergence of, or like just knew about like different collectives, the poetry collectives that were offered in London, which was a huge privilege because, you know, it's not available everywhere to have like people just to have open workshops if you're like 18 to 25. And I like found out about Barbican Young Poets and was so excited by them because it was, you know, poets who I thought were so incredible. And I applied to do Barbican in my first year of uni, but my confidence was still really low, to be honest, at that point. I was like I think I was trying to, I think a lot of poets and a lot of writers talk about like how you immediately try and imitate people you admire first off. And that's, I didn't think I was doing that because I was listening to people talk about how, you know, you always imitate, and I was like, I'm not imitating because I'm aware that you, and I was like obviously imitating people that I admired. And then like later on just realized that it wasn't, it was more like, it was different to wanting to publish anything or like wanting to have a poem that talks about X topic because that's like what's, you know, kind of current, and also being aware that there is still this kind of like sometimes predatory like approach that people will have to people of color who are poets of like, okay, you can read about your experience and like just like divulge your experience of racism on the page. So I was very like anxious about how my poems would be read, and flailed a bit at that time. But I was just so lucky. I think I was really lucky to just know so many people whose work I admired, who are also good people and like would gas me and like also criticize me, or also be
Have we lost Sarah?
to show everything, like the way Victoria mentioned, like, you know, if you feel like you have to, so apologies if I'm cutting out here and there. But that essentially, yeah, just through all the people that I love and admired, their support and their kind of like grounding was a big thing for me. Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of, so I had a question that actually follows on really well from that, and then we've got another one from the audience, which was so a couple of the poems in your collection kind of interact with or kind of engage with the work of other poets, and I was wondering how that plays into your work. And you were talking about kind of you're imitating other poets, but actually maybe sometimes that's not a bad thing, and yeah, so if you could maybe talk a bit about other writers whose work you love.
Yeah, definitely. Like in this book, there's a poem called Language, which is after a form by Jerica Brown, called the duplex, which is an incredible form. And I think to your point of imitation, you're right. Like it's not always necessarily a bad thing, especially if you're kind of you're aware of what you're doing. I think it's kind of like a cognizance that you're playing with somebody else's form or style in a way that might be useful to what you're trying to say. But that form in particular was introduced to me by Poet of Our Dreams, Ankita Saxena, who I think is in the Zoom room. Because last year I was assembling these poems and language existed in a completely different form, or no form at all really. And all of the poem was kind of like flailing a bit. I didn't really know how to capture it. And she showed me that poem by Jerica Brown. And I just kind of knew that was going to be the way in, because it needed to have this like way of folding back in on itself, like kind of consistently. And ages ago, when we did a residency at St. Paul's Cathedral, which was wild, we also had a task of trying to devise our own forms, which is a completely tangential point, but it was basically that form. It was basically me trying to do a duplex. I think I called it like a flat staircase or something, and it didn't work. It was very bad. But getting to that form finally, and someone else having done it and being like, wow, like this works for me in a really like gratifying way, but also obviously crediting the poet for like making it possible. So yeah, I think poets that I admire, I'm definitely gonna like speak to in the work and respond to their work, but then also just people and like poets I admire who are living and like in my friendship circles, I'm lucky enough to say, to just like listen to them and be so inspired. Like I think that's why I miss reading so much, because I just get to like show up and know that like I'm gonna get the goods. Like I'm gonna hear Victoria read, or I'm gonna hear like Ankita read, and it's gonna bring something out of me if I've been like feeling very stagnant, which sometimes is the case.
I love that poem so much, the duplex one, and I hadn't heard of the form before, and as someone in the chat has said, you did wonders with it. So I'm just going to ask the last question and then we'll try and close. So Mary has asked, you spoke about insularity and a kind of intentionality you brought when putting your collection together, but also about how you've worked on some of these for some time. Curious to know whether these poems or any of your other finished poems ever take on new meanings to you when you revisit or read or speak them aloud.
Yeah, definitely, all the time. I think, yeah, in a way that was really, that's what I was most terrified of when assembling the poems, because I know that when I read them live in a room, they'll change, or I'll feel differently about them, or like somebody's response, or somebody's, not even a direct response, but just how it sounds in a room really dictates like how I'll edit. So a lot of them, yeah, some of them were like pretty much done. A lot of them were, I was considering like unfinished, even though they've been sitting with me for like a long time. So I think I don't know if they'll change from now on, because I think one of the most gratifying things about like the immense privilege and like joy of having a whole physical book, thank you again, Hajar, is that like now it does feel like I can return to them in a way that doesn't I'm not anxious about it anymore. Like I'm not like destabilized by the idea that I could change something or I could edit something. It kind of exists on the page in a way that I know is going to have a lot of other encounters with other people reading it now. So I feel less of the pressure to like respond or like to think about how it sounds or think about how it's going to be interpreted, because it's already, the way that it exists now is conducive to that. So I don't have to do anything else. Yeah, which is an absolute joy.
Thank you so much. So I think that we'll probably close the questions there. I just wanted to say on behalf of all of us in this event, thank you again so much to Victoria and Sarah. This has been an incredible discussion, and I think that it's kind of reached towards those readings that we all miss so much. And yeah, I've really enjoyed it, and I'm also really grateful to everybody who's joined. To anybody who doesn't have the book, you can buy it from hajarpress.com. You can buy it as part of our subscription, which includes 5 other books, or you could buy it individually from the website. I think that's probably all. So I know that some people are probably fasting and probably want to make it to iftar. So yeah, I guess, yeah, we'll leave it there. And thank you again to everybody. And to anybody celebrating Eid over the next few days, have a nice Eid Mubarak.